There's a camera on this street. There is another 140 meters away. Somewhere in a control room, or more likely in a server rack you will never see, software is already comparing the shape of your face to a database. You didn't consent to it. You probably don't know it's there. And in a growing number of British towns, that is no longer the exception. It is the plan. In 1949, George Orwell published a novel about a country called Oceania, ruled by a party whose face was everywhere and whose eyes, it seemed, never closed. He called it 1984. It was fiction. It was a warning. It was not supposed to be a documentary about the United Kingdom 70-odd years later. And yet, piece by piece, law by law, camera by camera, it is worth asking an uncomfortable question. How much distance is actually left between the two? This is not a video that claims Britain is Oceania. It isn't. There is no single Big Brother, no one party responsible, no secret police disappearing people in the night. The story is messier than that, and Messier is more honest. What follows is a walk through some of the most significant surveillance and speech laws passed or expanded in the UK across the last few years, set directly against the machinery Orwell imagined, and against a very different piece of fiction that saw this coming from an entirely different angle, a 2013 Black Mirror episode called The Waldo Moment. By the end, you can decide for yourself how much of a coincidence that really is. Let's start with the telescreen. In the novel, every home and workplace is one, a screen that broadcasts propaganda outward and watches the room inward at all times, with no way to turn it off. It is the single image most people remember from the book. A device that is ostensibly there for your convenience and is actually there to watch you. Britain doesn't have telescreens. It has something arguably more thorough. It has the highest concentration of CCTV cameras of almost any country outside China, and as of the last 2 years, it has started actively layering facial recognition on top of that existing camera network, rather than simply recording footage after the fact. In December 2025, the Home Office confirmed it wants to significantly scale up live facial recognition and biometric capability, backing that ambition with investment in mobile recognition vans and fixed camera installations. The following month, in January 2026, the government went further, announcing plans to roll live facial recognition out to every regional police force in England and Wales, funded in part by the purchase of 40 new recognition vans. As of March 2026, 13 of the 43 police forces in England and Wales were already using it, with a full national rollout now the stated goal. Some of this infrastructure isn't mobile at all anymore. In October 2025, the UK switched on its first permanent facial recognition cameras, fixed in place in Croydon, South London. Hammersmith and Fulham has separately approved live facial recognition cameras across 10 locations in that London borough alone. This is no longer a temporary deployment for a football match or a protest. It is becoming part of the street furniture. And behind all of it sits £115 million of government money, committed to a new police.ai center whose explicit job is to standardize this technology across all 43 police forces in the country. Here is the detail that should sit uncomfortably with anyone who has read the book. Oversight has not kept pace with any of this. Watchdog groups and even parliamentary researchers have pointed out that the legal framework governing live facial recognition in Britain is years behind the technology it's supposed to regulate. The cameras came first. The rules are still being written. Orwell's telescreen didn't need a legal basis, because in his world, the party didn't answer to one. Real Britain still does, at least on paper. Whether the paper catches up to the hardware is, at the time of this recording, genuinely still an open question. And facial recognition is only the newest layer. Underneath it, Britain has run a quieter, older system for years that most people never think about. Automatic number plate recognition. Somewhere between 11 and 13,000 ENPR cameras, fixed to motorway gantries and high streets across the country, feed a national database with an almost unbelievable volume of data, on the order of 50 to 60 million number plate reads every single day. Every one of those reads is a time-stamped record of a specific vehicle in a specific place. Strung together. That's not a photograph. It's a movement history. Where you drove, when, how often, alongside whom, retained centrally for around a year, whether or not you have ever been suspected of anything at all. Orwell never wrote a scene of the party tracking Winston's footsteps block by block, because he didn't need to. The telescreen already saw everything. Real Britain built the footstep tracker separately, gradually, largely without a single national conversation about whether it should exist at that scale, and now runs it in parallel with the camera network switching on above it. Then there's the part of this that doesn't watch where you've been, but tries to calculate where you're going, in a much more literal sense than that phrase usually means. Durham Constabulary has used a tool called HART, the Harm Assessment Risk Tool, which estimates a person's likelihood of reoffending using inputs that include their age, gender, and postcode. Bristol City Council and Avon and Somerset Police fed residents data, including mental health records, housing status, and school meal eligibility, into a separate system built to produce a running risk score for adults and children alike, before city officials themselves lost enough confidence in it to quietly shut two of those models down. Nationally, a Ministry of Justice crime prediction tool has been piloting since December 2024 with a full rollout targeted for this year. By January of this year alone, it had already produced over 9,000 reoffending risk assessments, more than 1,300 a day, feeding a database that by then held upwards of 7 million individual risk scores. Sit with what that actually is: a government algorithm, assigning a number to a person, based substantially on where they live and who they're related to, before that person has done anything to earn scrutiny beyond an address. There is no equivalent of the ordinary safeguards that apply when police actually arrest or charge someone. No independent audit most citizens can access, no public register of who's been scored or why, no formal appeal if the model gets it wrong. That is not thought crime in Orwell's sense, exactly, since nobody is being punished for a private opinion. It's arguably the modern, faceless cousin of it. Judgment before the fact, delivered not by the thought police, but by a scoring model nobody elected and few can see inside of. Now, the telescreen wasn't only a camera. It was also an ear, listening for anything that might qualify as thought crime. A facial expression held a moment too long, a word out of place, private doubt about the party's version of events. The thought police didn't need you to break a law. They needed you to think the wrong thing, and they needed a record of it. Britain built something with an unsettling family resemblance to that, and it's worth giving it credit for also eventually correcting course. Since 2014, police forces across England and Wales have logged what are called non-crime hate incidents, reports of hostility or prejudice that don't rise to the level of an actual offense, but get written down and kept on file anyway. Over 11 years, that added up to more than 133,000 recorded incidents for things that, by definition, broke no law. Critics pointed out the obvious problem: a permanent record of a person's alleged attitude, created by the state, with no crime attached to it, is about as close as a modern liberal democracy gets to policing what's in your head rather than what you've done. And then, in December 2025, the system was scrapped. Senior police leaders and the Home Office announced they would end the practice of recording non-crime hate incidents in their current form, replacing it with a narrower standard tied directly to preventing actual crime and protecting public order, not lawful opinions someone found distasteful. The new guidance is explicit that lawful free speech is not a police matter. That reversal matters, and it matters for the argument this video is making, not against it. The machinery of a surveillance state and the machinery of a healthy democracy aren't different in what they're capable of building. They're different in whether that machinery gets rolled back when enough people object. Britain on this one rolled it back. Keep that in mind because it's going to come up again. Where thought crime gets harder to walk back is in your pocket, not on a police log. In January 2026, new rules under the Online Safety Act came into force, legally requiring digital platforms to run automated scanning systems that monitor, detect, and block content before it ever reaches the person it was sent to. Not after a complaint. Before delivery. The stated targets are genuinely serious. Material like cyberflashing and content encouraging self-harm. Nobody is arguing those categories shouldn't be tackled. The argument is about the method, because the same law gives regulators the power to compel platforms to scan private messages for other categories of harmful content too, and the only technically workable way to do that at scale is something called client-side scanning, software on your own phone, reading your messages before encryption even applies to them. That is not a metaphorical telescreen. It is closer to a literal one, just smaller, and it lives in your hand instead of your living room wall. Underneath the Online Safety Act sits an older piece of law, the Investigatory Powers Act of 2016, which gives the Home Secretary the power to issue secret technical capability notices, legal orders compelling a company to strip out encryption entirely and to not tell you it happened. This isn't hypothetical either. In February 2025, Apple withdrew its strongest end-to-end encryption feature, Advanced Data Protection, for UK customers specifically, rather than comply with a notice reportedly demanding a backdoor into it. Signal and the encrypted messaging app Element have both said, on the record, that they would rather leave the UK market entirely than build scanning systems into their products. Whether secure, truly private messaging survives in this country in its current form may genuinely be decided within this year. Orwell's Ministry of Truth didn't spy on your letters after the fact. It made sure the right version of events existed before anyone got the chance to write the wrong one down. There's a version of that instinct here too, just running on very different infrastructure. Not editing history, but preemptively deciding what you're allowed to say before you've said it. Let's talk about the party's other great fear in the book. People gathering. Physically, visibly, in numbers in public. The party didn't need to ban assembly outright. It just made sure that meaningful assembly effectively never happened, through surveillance, through informants, through sheer exhaustion of the population's will to organize. The UK hasn't banned protest. It has, however, spent the last 3 years narrowing exactly what a legal protest is allowed to look like. The Public Order Act 2023 created a run of new offenses: locking on, meaning attaching yourself to another person, an object, or land; tunneling, obstructing major transport works, interfering with what the law calls key national infrastructure. Between 2023 and 2025, 169 people were arrested under the locking on offense alone, 104 of them charged. 55 more were arrested simply for carrying equipment that could be used to lock on, whether they used it or not. The definition of what counts as protected infrastructure has kept expanding since. In February 2026, new regulations extended those disruption offenses to cover life sciences infrastructure specifically. And in June 2026, an entirely new law, the Crime and Policing Act, came into force, criminalizing concealing your face at a protest, climbing on a war memorial, or carrying pyrotechnics at a demonstration. Sit with a face-covering offense for a second, because it's the detail that ties this whole section together. The same country that is racing to blanket its streets with live facial recognition cameras has, in the same 18-month window, made it a specific criminal offense to cover your face while exercising your right to protest. You can debate the public order justification for that law on its own terms, and reasonable people do. But look at the two policies side by side, and the effect is unmistakable. It is now both technologically and legally harder than at any point in modern British history to be present at a demonstration and remain anonymous to the state. The government has, to its credit, opened an independent review, led by Lord MacDonald, into whether this entire body of public order and hate crime law still strikes the right balance. That review is ongoing. What it concludes will say a great deal about which direction this keeps moving. Now for the piece of this that got walked back the furthest because it deserves the same fairness as the non-crime hate incident reversal. In September 2025, the Prime Minister announced a new digital ID scheme for UK residents, unofficially nicknamed the Brick Card, intended to sit in people's phone wallets and help verify the right to work. It was initially framed as effectively mandatory in practice, even if not legally compulsory outright, and the backlash was immediate and came from across the political spectrum: civil liberties groups, opposition politicians, a very large chunk of the general public, all raising some version of the same objection Orwell would have recognized instantly. A single, centralized, government-issued credential you are expected to produce on demand is precisely the kind of infrastructure a surveillance state is built out of, whatever the stated justification. In January 2026, the government backed down. Digital ID would not be made mandatory for British citizens. Other forms of identification would remain acceptable. As of this recording, it's a live public consultation, not a settled compulsory system. That is, again, the version of this story that should complicate any simple narrative about inevitability. The plan for a national identity credential met public resistance, and the plan changed. Oceania's party never had to explain itself to anyone. Whatever else is true about modern Britain, its government still, repeatedly, visibly, has to. Let's take stock for a second, because it's easy to lose the shape of this under the weight of individual facts. Cameras that watch your face. A national record of every car you've driven and where. An algorithm quietly scoring your likelihood of future crime based partly on your postcode. A messaging app required to read what you type before you've finished typing it. A protest you're now legally barred from attending with your face covered, in the same country installing permanent recognition cameras on the street outside. None of these were announced together as one policy by one government, with one name attached. That's precisely the point. Orwell's Oceania needed a ministry for each function, a single coordinated bureaucracy of control. Real infrastructure doesn't need coordination to add up to the same shape. It just needs each individual piece to sound reasonable in isolation, and nobody in the room asking what the total looks like once you stop looking at the pieces one at a time. Picture an ordinary Tuesday under everything just described, not as speculation, but as a straightforward walk through facts already on the table. You leave your flat, and the council's ANPR camera on the corner logs your car, one entry among the tens of millions collected that day, retained for a year regardless of whether you've ever done anything wrong. You drive past a fixed facial recognition camera installed the previous autumn, and somewhere a system checks your face against a watch list in real time, whether or not you know the watch list exists. You send a message to a friend complaining about a decision your local council made, and depending on which app you used and what Ofcom has designated a priority category that month, that message may already have passed through automated scanning before it reached them. If your friend takes real offense and reports you, and the report doesn't meet the new, narrower threshold introduced after the 2025 reforms, it gets no crime number and no police record at all, which is progress worth acknowledging. If it had happened 3 years earlier, it might have joined 133,000 other entries on a database of alleged attitudes. That evening, you go to a demonstration about something you actually care about, and you think better of wearing a scarf against the cold over the lower half of your face, because since June this year, that alone is a specific criminal offense at a protest. None of that is dramatized. Every piece of it is a real, current, named policy. The only thing invented here is the single day that strings them together, and stringing them together is the entire point. No individual law in that Tuesday reads like tyranny. Add them up, and you get something that reads uncomfortably close to it. It's worth pausing here on something else Orwell's party understood instinctively, which is that control doesn't only run through fear. It runs through boredom, apathy, and spectacle, too. Which brings this somewhere Orwell never went, and somewhere considerably stranger. A fictional British sitcom cartoon named Waldo. The Waldo Moment aired in 2013, part of Charlie Brooker's Black Mirror. Waldo is a foul-mouthed, crudely animated blue bear, built for a late-night satire show, voiced live by a struggling comedian who despises his own creation. Waldo's entire political power comes from having no actual politics, no policy, no record, no accountability, nothing but personality, aggression, and the ability to say the thing everyone's thinking with none of the consequences a real candidate would face. When producers push Waldo into an actual UK parliamentary by-election against earnest, flawed, human politicians, something happens that the episode plays as darkly funny and means as a genuine warning. Waldo starts winning. Not because voters believe in him, because they've stopped believing in anything else, and a cartoon that mocks the whole system feels more honest than a system that no longer feels like it's listening. That's the same mechanism Orwell described, run through an entirely different piece of machinery. Big Brother's mustachioed face on every wall wasn't there because citizens loved him. It was there because the alternative to that face had been made unimaginable. Waldo's grinning blue face doesn't work through fear or censorship. It works because real political engagement has become exhausting enough that a joke feels like relief. Same vacuum, different tool filling it. And then the episode does something that, on a rewatch, plays less like satire and more like prophecy. Its final scene jumps years into the future. Jamie, the man who used to voice Waldo, is destitute, beaten down, irrelevant. But Waldo himself didn't go away. The character has been sold, licensed, and deployed internationally, and the closing images show his face now used as an instrument of actual authoritarian control. Giant screens broadcasting his likeness over crowds, riot police in the streets, a protester being beaten while Waldo's cartoon grin looms overhead on a screen that never turns off. The joke became the mascot. The mascot became the enforcement arm. A character invented purely for entertainment, with no ideology of its own, became the recognizable public face of genuine state violence. Put that image next to Orwell's telescreen, and the two stories start talking to each other. One imagines total control starting with fear and surveillance and never needing entertainment at all. The other imagines total control starting with entertainment and apathy, and arriving at surveillance and force anyway, almost as an afterthought, because by the time anyone's paying attention, the infrastructure is already built and already normal. Two fictions, 40 years apart, converging on the same destination from opposite directions, a public that stopped watching the machinery closely enough to notice when it finished being built. Charlie Brooker has said in various forms that Black Mirror was never really about technology. It was about the people holding the technology and what they reach for the moment nobody's stopping them. That's exactly why the Waldo moment still lands over a decade later, in a way that has nothing to do with predicting any specific cartoon bear taking real power. It predicted the mechanism, that a public exhausted by real political conversation will reward whatever short-circuits the exhaustion, that the people building the short-circuit rarely intend the ending they end up with, and that by the time anyone notices what the character has become, it's already licensed out, already everywhere, and already too useful to whoever's in charge to switch off. Swap the cartoon bear for a facial recognition van, or a scanning algorithm, or an app that quietly reads your messages for your own safety, and the mechanism doesn't change at all. Something built to solve a real, sympathetic problem, sold as convenience or protection or a joke, ends up as infrastructure nobody quite remembers agreeing to. So, where does that leave the real country all of this is actually happening in? Here's the thing that matters most, and it's the thing worth being genuinely careful about. Almost none of this belongs to one political party. The Investigatory Powers Act was passed in 2016. The Online Safety Act was passed in 2023. The Public Order Act was passed in 2023. All three under conservative-led governments. The Online Safety Act's toughest new scanning rules came into force in January 2026. The live facial recognition national rollout was announced that same January, and the Crime and Policing Act's protest restrictions landed in June 2026, all three under the Labour government that took office in 2024. The digital ID plan was Labour's. Its partial reversal was also Labour's under public pressure. The non-crime hate incident rollback happened on Labour's watch too. That is not a story about one party dragging Britain toward Oceania while another resists. It's a story about a piece of infrastructure and a set of instincts that seem to survive changes of government almost completely intact, because the appeal of we could stop nearly all of this bad thing if we just had a little more visibility into everyone's activity doesn't actually belong to any one side of the aisle. It belongs to power itself, and every government that's held power in this country over the last decade has, to varying degrees, reached for it. None of this means Britain in 2026 is Airstrip One. It isn't. There is a free press still capable of reporting every single fact in this video, and doing so without anyone disappearing. There is an actual functioning opposition. There are courts, watchdogs, parliamentary committees, and an independent review currently underway specifically to check whether this body of law has gone too far. Two of the specific policies covered here, the mandatory digital ID and the non-crime hate incident system, were rolled back after public pressure within the space of a single year. Orwell's Oceania didn't have an undo button. Britain repeatedly still does. But an undo button only matters if enough people notice there's something worth pressing it for. That's the actual through line connecting a 75-year-old novel to a decade-old TV episode to a stack of legislation passed in the last 3 years. Not that surveillance and control arrive with a jackboot and an announcement, but that they arrive as infrastructure, as convenience, as a cartoon that's funnier than the politicians, as an app that's more convenient than a queue, as a camera that's there to help solve crime. Each individual piece is defensible on its own terms. It's only when you step back and look at the shape they make together, telescreen and camera van, thought crime and hate incident log, Ministry of Truth and preemptive message scanner, Big Brother's face and a blue cartoon bear's grin, that the resemblance becomes hard to unsee. Orwell didn't write 1984 as a prediction. He wrote it as a warning, specifically so it wouldn't have to become one. Whether that warning still lands in a country that keeps building the hardware for control and keeps, so far, occasionally deciding not to switch all of it on isn't something a video essay gets to decide for you. It's a live question, not a settled one, and it's the country you're standing in that's currently answering it. What actually determines the answer isn't the technology itself. Facial recognition, ANPR, message scanning, risk scoring algorithms. None of it is inherently totalitarian, and most of it was built to solve problems that are genuinely real. Violent crime, child abuse material, terrorism, disorder that makes ordinary life worse for everyone nearby. The party in Orwell's book didn't need any of that technology to justify itself, because it never had to justify itself to anyone. The one thing standing between a surveillance capability and a surveillance state, in a system that still holds elections and still has courts and still has journalists able to publish everything in this video without being disappeared for it, is whether enough people keep asking the boring, unglamorous questions. Who has access to this data, for how long, reviewed by whom, reversible by what process? That's a far less cinematic fight than storming a Ministry of Truth. It's also the only fight that's actually available, and on the evidence of the digital ID climb down and the non-crime hate incident reversal, it's a fight that can still be won. If you think that resemblance matters, subscribe, because there's a lot more of this to unpack. And next time a camera van pulls up in your high street, or an app asks to verify who you are before you've said a word, ask yourself which story you're actually living inside.